What should the penalty be for people who lie and spread dangerous misinformation? Good question. Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Chris Martins, and today we're going to discuss the lies of Dr. Peter Hotez. He has been one of the most vociferous changer of stories and purveyor of misinformation of anybody I've seen. Now, listen, I actually think people can go ahead and purvey misinformation if they want. What they can't do is misuse their position of official authority to mislead people intentionally so that they maybe can make some more money or they aren't professionally embarrassed or something like that. In the free marketplace of ideas, I think it's okay to have differences of opinion, but I think Peter Hotez is out there spreading demonstrably dangerous lies at this point in time, which of course is something he is accusing people like me of doing. So we're on opposite sides of this. Let's take a listen in. I'm going to deconstruct this, but first, let's hear what he has to say. Now, is this a couple of minutes of an interview here?
The deaths really accelerated in the Delta wave, and that accounts for a lion's share of those 200,000.
That's true.
There are also significant numbers of deaths among the unvaccinated in the BA1 Omicron wave. That started in early 2022. And there, you started to see some deaths even among the vaccinated because of waning immunity, and the virus was so different from the original lineage, which ultimately got corrected in the boosters. But so there, what you really needed to ensure that you weren't going to lose your life was to get a booster, get that third immunization, which unfortunately, for the same reasons, a lot of people didn't get.
Yet CDC was considering fully vaccinated even without the boosters. Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I never understood that. I pushed really hard. I going on the cable news channels as I did multiple times a day, and I kept on pleading with Americans, get your booster, get your booster. And because immunity is waning for reasons that we don't quite understand, I think that it does seem to be a weakness of the mRNA technology, that it doesn't hold up. There's a preprint I saw that came online recently. I think it was either in BioArchive or MedArchive, maybe suggesting a mechanism that mRNA is not inducing long-lasting plasma cells as well as we had hoped. And
you said,
maybe it's not a problem with the other technologies. Our vaccine was a recombinant protein technology, but it really became important for Americans to get their boosters. So I pushed that, and I'm still pushing it. I pushed on the bivalent booster last September, and I pushed on this new annual immunization that became the September 2022, and then I pushed on the annual immunization that just became available in last September as well. But that is another factor. Yeah.
All right, so he pushed and pushed and pushed. So what did we learn? First, he needs to figure out what a brush or a comb is for whatever's going on up there. Second, he said that he does read preprints, so we're going to question whether he's been reading any science at all or just misreading it or not reading stuff that doesn't conform to his belief systems. And then I'm going to show you how conflicted this guy actually is. So let's go down a layer. First, he said, there was all these excess deaths. 200,000 people died during Delta, but then all these people died during that first wave of Omicron in early 2022. Now, this is kind of interesting. You can see here, let me get my laser pointer out because I like using these things. This is a big old wave right here in the U.S. Now, first, we don't know, did these people die with or did they die of? But second of all, we can look at how other countries fared, particularly other countries that didn't undergo mass vaccination campaigns in quite the same way. And so we might say, well, United States, first world country, access to all the possible resources, the NIH, billions and billions of dollars, awesome spokespeople like Peter Hotez. We should have been able to get this right, and we didn't, compared to, say India, which had this one big Delta spike, which was admittedly pretty nasty. So that's why they keep pushing back to Delta. But remember, COVID is not a thing. The COVID Alpha, very different clinical presentation from Beta, especially so from Delta, right? Gamma, totally different. And we've had all these different lineages. But once Omicron came out, it wasn't like we're dealing with one thing. Omicron is totally different clinical beast, possibly even completely different in all possible ways from the earlier stuff that came out of that lab, right? So probably in Wuhan, China, we think, but trust is pretty comprehensively shattered. That could have come from a lab anywhere. And maybe that's just where the epicenter was tagged We don't know. I don't know. I don't know which lab Omicron and COVID came from. I just know they came from a lab, right? All right. With that though, but look at how the United States did here compared to India. India had that one big wave, and then that was the end of it, right? But the United States had these multiple waves. Now, why did we have that? Now, was that just because we were miscategorizing this? Don't know. Or was India miscategorizing it? Don't really know. Now, let's note as well, he said, Peter Hotez said, yeah, but we have these updated boosters now. True. You go right here. There's the FDA.gov. It says right here, which COVID-19 vaccines are available. They say for 23-24, the XBB 1.5 SARS-CoV-2 lineage. They've updated it. You get some of the original strain, which isn't even circulating for years now. Plus, you get some of this strain. It's a bivalent, they say, two things, bivalent. And so that's what the FDA is pushing out. And that's what Peter Hotez is saying. Yeah, I've been pushing this vaccine on all Americans because we have these updated boosters. Well, look, this is not even really very hard to talk about. I mean, this is an update here from July 3rd of 2024. All you have to do is go here to the Institute of the IDSA here and for these diseases. And you can see here that, look, XBB 1.5 isn't even on this list anywhere. It's not even on here. And even the new JN1 has already been superseded now by this KP3. So by the time they get to the JN1 booster, that's gone too. So COVID, as predicted, as a highly labile, that is a highly mutagenic, a highly unstable mRNA virus, is going to be mutating very, very rapidly. And so anything you do that says, well, we'll see what's circulating and then we'll take some months and we'll develop a vaccine against that variant, it's already moved on, baby, right? It is gone. So that's what Peter Hotez is talking about. And by the way, they are talking about moving on here. They're like, June 14th, 2024 update from the FDA here, COVID-19 vaccines, if feasible, use the KP2 strain instead of the JN1 lineage, because they just moved on to the JN1 just earlier this year, but it's already gone from the system here. This is JN1 here back in just a few months ago, and here it is today. It's like pretty much gone. It's been outcompeted by these other things. So, whoops, gone. Okay, but let's look at this. Peter Hotez said, what you really needed to ensure that you weren't going to lose your life was to get a booster. And I kept on pleading with Americans, get your booster. Now, first question, why were you pleading with Americans? Like, Americans range in age from 0 days old, just born this morning, to 110 years of age. It's a big, wide range. Now, Peter, you've known this for a long time. This is an NIH paper by John Ioannidis out of Stanford. And basically, if you read this chart, Peter, let me help you. Let me walk you through this, Peter. If you read this chart carefully, it says that if you are under the age of 60, that your survival rate across all of COVID-19, and this includes the deadly strains like Omicron, just not deadly anymore. If you include all the strains, including Delta, the average survival here was 99.9% survival. So why would you be pleading with somebody who's 50 to 59, who has a 99.9% survival rate, but worse, 0 to 19? The CDC is still recommending the COVID shots for people 6 months of age and older, right? Down here, this is a log chart. That's 0.0001%. So that would be a 99.99999% chance of survival if you happen to be 0 to 19. If you were down at this bar down here, they were a little bit higher, so let's call it 99.9999. It's just like, why all Americans? So with a survival line, this is against infections, right? So if you get an infection, what's your chance of surviving, right? That's the infection fatality rate. By the way, they say the 25th percentile for the 0 to 19 and 20 to 29 age groups, we didn't show them, because that would have been technically 0.0000. So their 25% confidence interval would have been like, oh yeah, nobody died of this thing who was under the age of 30. Okay. That's what they're saying here, right? And now that we're in Omicron, just these numbers are even more survival-y, right? That's the data. So why Peter, are you pleading with Americans as a cohort, as a group, as if it's one thing? COVID, Americans. It's so cartoonishly stupid that we know that he's either lying or he's lying, because he's not that dumb, right? He would obviously be able to parse this, but he still can't manage the nuance, right? Because that's not his job. His job is to sell vaccines to everyone. That's his job. That's how he gets paid by his sponsors, right? He should have a little sponsor thing that says Pfizer over here and Moderna over here and GlaxoSmithKline on a hat. This guy is of, by, and for the pharmaceutical machine, right? And that he gets some of his funding from the NIH is irrelevant, because the NIH is fundamentally just a pharmaceutical, let's say, they are in the business of making the pharmaceutical industry look competent and believable. I mean, that's mostly what their job is, right? Even though obviously that's not something that they should be doing. But why is Peter unable to grasp the nuance of both the age stratification, which we just showed you here, right, against the risk? What are the risks of these vaccines, right? What are they? So let's talk about this. This is a WHO study that came out, all right? So we know that Peter reads preprints. He told us that in the opening montage there, monologue. So vaccine effectiveness against SARS-CoV-2 confirmed hospitalizations in 6 countries. So this is 6 countries, country-level stuff, and areas in WHO European region. So first 2 years, what did they find? Even a WHO study, which they did their level best to just like twist the data so it would look as positive as possible, had to say that there was a negative vaccine effectiveness of minus 40%, which is no good, against severe disease. That would be severe respiratory disease. That's all they looked at. They didn't look at any of the other things that could have happened. They didn't look for uptakes and up boostings of cancers and neurological issues, strokes. They didn't look at any of that stuff. Just for the one thing that this vaccine is supposed to protect against, which is severe acquired respiratory distress, right? That's what that's what they were looking for. That's what SARS stands for anyway, severe acquired respiratory syndrome, right? But that distress would happen when people had the bilateral ground glass, can't breathe, happy hypoxic kind of thing. But look at this right there in the WHO document. Annual VE, that's vaccine effectiveness against severe disease, showed a similar pattern. It shows some early benefits, right? 66%, not 100%, but 66% for the first dose. If it's within 14 to 179 days, it goes 23%. But at 180, at 100 and 270 days to 364, that's 9 months to 12 months. If you had that shot 9 months to 12 months earlier, in yellow, minus 40%. You are more likely to end up with a severe outcome for respiratory syndrome than if you hadn't gotten the shots. Okay? So now we have to ask, well, why is Peter pleading to this day? If look at this messaging. You weren't going to lose your life. The way you do that is to get a booster. Well, Peter, what you're saying is that people have to get on the booster train then, because the effectiveness is short-lived and then it turns negative. And people ought to, in the interest of informed consent, Peter, in the interest of informed consent, people should be told that, right? Hey, if you get this shot, you're going to forever be on a train of having to get more and more and more shots, or else you're going to slip into negative vaccine effectiveness territory. You will be more likely, not less likely, more likely to end up with severe outcomes. That's what this WHO paper is saying. That's not how this is supposed to work. That's not how any of this is supposed to work. How is it that it's up to guys like me and gals like Jessica Rose, etc., Jicky Leaks, all those other people? Why is it up to us to like, this is simple stuff. I don't have, you know what my budget for doing this work is? Zero. In fact, I have to pay for my own Comcast connection. Okay. This is my own equipment I had to pay for. No government money came into the studio, right? This is what I have to do in order to just I'm flabbergasted because this isn't that hard, right? This should be really easy. Like, it shouldn't be this way. We should be able to go, oh, look at that. And further, remember, this was in 2022 this came out. This was the Cleveland study. Remember this? Yeah, you can just barely see it. So this clearly shows this is just people catching COVID, right? This has nothing to do with outcomes. We're not registering how severe is the disease or any of that stuff, but just detectable COVID. There's a perfect dose response curve. If I was in the pharma business, I'd be like, yes, I have built the perfect device, the perfect thing, because this is a perfect dose response curve, meaning you all the way in the bottom in that black line, you had less of a chance of contracting COVID if you had no doses compared to somebody who had one dose, who had less of a chance compared to somebody who had two doses, who had less of a chance compared to somebody who had three doses, and had less of a chance compared to somebody who had more than three doses. By the way, if you get more and more boosters, you are more and more likely to contract COVID. Now, many of you know this anecdotally because you know people, or perhaps you yourself, you've been vaccinated. You're like, why am I catching this thing all the time? And I'm over here, I'm unvaccinated, and I haven't had a detectable sniffle in a couple of years now. And so that the reason for that is because of this. And so he said, oh, we don't really know what's happening. Remember, he said this too. He said, because immunity is waning for reasons that we don't quite understand. Peter, we do understand. It's called the IgG4 buildup, right? That's a certain class of immunoglobulins. It's a very well-known thing within your supposed field of immunology and vaccinology, that when you go to that class switch away from IgG1 and 2 to IgG4, IgG4 is telling the body to not fight this thing that it's now seeing. It down-regulates the immune system. So that would be perfectly consistent with something like this. We do have a reasonable understanding of what's going on here and why. And he said, I think that it does seem to be a weakness of the mRNA technology that it doesn't hold up, right? Really? And he said, but it really became important for Americans to get their booster. So I pushed that, and I'm still pushing it. Again, for Americans, like all Americans, right? 0 to 19, same as 70 to 79-year-olds. To Peter, it's all one thing, because his job isn't to provide nuance, provide helpful advice, to be a voice of authority and reason. His job is to help sell more vaccines for the pharma business. And by the way, Peter, you should be aware of this too. This is a study. I'm doing this for free for you. This was put out by Craig Kelly. Surfaced this. Craig, so sorry. I inadvertently, I had Andrew Bridget in my mind, and I mislabeled you as a UK MP. Please forgive me. He's from Australia. So Craig Kelly found this and said this study is in a German study, differential increases in excess mortality in the German federal states during the COVID-19 pandemic by these two people. Again, they say that the vaccination had no beneficial effect, which is a fancy way of saying an unbeneficial effect. Quote, if the vaccinations were effective, the federal states with the highest vaccination rates would have benefited the most, which means that the correlation between vaccinations and mortality observed in the first year of the pandemic should have been even more negative in the second year of the pandemic and the third year, right? More negative meaning the more vaccines you had, the negative correlation would be the fewer excess deaths you have, right? Because the vaccines are helping people not die. What did they find here instead? They found here, if you look at the increase in all-cause mortality, in excess mortality, all-cause mortality, these are horrifying percentages. This is as straight a dose response curve as you ever want to see as well. This is, and this is vaccination percent. So the more this is a very easy chart to interpret. The more vaccination percentage you had, the higher the excess deaths you had across these 6 states. Join me on camera 3 for just a second, would you? Okay, Peter, listen up. This is way beyond just a bad look at this point in time, okay? This is inexcusable. We can't find a way to think that maybe you're just this ignorant, or you're unable to read newspapers, or you're unable to follow science like we're following it here. This is now crossed into territory where we're starting to suspect that you're being dishonest with us all and doing it in a way that is actually causing great harm. But the funny part is that you spend your days running around crying about how people like me aren't believing you, and you consider that to be an affront. Methinks the senator doth protest too loudly. Well, at any rate, I think we have to carry on here and keep talking about this, because this is from a poll I did from the NIH asking the question, who was Peter Hotez working on his vaccine development with, and what kind of vaccines were they working on? This is from a 2010 summary of his all of his work through the NIH. And oh, hey, here he is working with somebody who trained in mainland China working on SARS. So this is way before COVID, right? COVID originated allegedly in 2019, but here they are back in 2010 working on, it's a Category C biodefense, NIAID, Category C biodefense. Wait, SARS is a biodefense thing, and here they are working on SARS and trying to figure out vaccine candidates? Yes, you heard it right. Peter Hotez's whole big chunk of his career has been about studying things like SARS, working with people who are monkeying around with SARS in the lab to create new versions so that they can practice making vaccines against them, so that people like Peter can have a grand career, be invited on lots of TV programs, get his ego assuaged and stroked, and also maybe make a ton of money. Okay, really? That's interesting. Who else is on his... Oh, well, here's somebody who worked the PLA, University of the People's Liberation Army in China. Okay, so directly working with the PLA. Again, this is straight from the NIH, right? He has a long history of partnering with China on SARS engineering and experimentation. It's all public record. This is all public data. Again, you see in the top thing there, this is from his poll, right? Here's another one, again, from China. So he has a pattern of working with people from China on SARS and SARS vaccine. So that's a conflict of interest. It needs to be disclosed. I'm disclosing it here for you now. You make of it what you will. Now, interestingly, the AMA is also not on the side of science, by the way. So here they ran a thing with Peter Hotez, Dr. Hotez on the anti-science movement in declining of Joe Rogan's debate challenge. Remember? A lot of people came forward and said, hey, Peter, if you're so confident in this stuff, just why don't you come on debate RFK on Joe Rogan? Rogan was willing to mediate it. $100,000 got tossed in. It eventually went to $2.5 million. And Hotez still declined on principles. He doesn't argue science with non-scientific people, even though obviously RFK Jr. is probably one of the most well-versed people in this subject of anybody that exists out there. They said here, quote, in today's AMA update, it's the American Medical Association, Peter Hotez discusses why he declined Joe Rogan's challenge to debate Robert F. Kennedy, the state of the anti-vaccine movement, and whether he's leaving Twitter for Threads. AMA Chief Experience Officer Todd Unger hosting. And this was a giant fluff piece, and it was just two people who are keepers of the system sort of fluffing each other up. I mean, look at this. This is really awful. Let's cover a bit of it. Unger says, this is how he opened the program. It has been 6 months and a lot has changed, but unfortunately one thing hasn't changed, which is the level of anti-science aggression that we've seen grow over the last few years. And in the I can't believe I know someone this is happening to file, you recently had a very public run-in with this kind of aggression when Joe Rogan challenged you to debate R.F. Kennedy. You see this stuff? It's an aggression. Poor Peter Hotez experienced aggression because somebody challenged him. Pro tip, people who are narcissists, they ride over your boundaries like crazy. They just ride roughshod, right? They miss appointments, they slander you, they denigrate you, they do all these things. And then when you finally say no, you just put up a barrier, say, stop, you can't do that anymore. They experience that as an attack on them. That's how they experience it. You just putting up a boundary, they experience it as an attack. So for somebody like Peter Hotez, I bet he did legitimately feel like he was being attacked because somebody said, dude, are you sure about this stuff? Now, I've just showed you all the ways that even to this day, Peter Hotez is desperately, dangerously wrong about science. The science he's allegedly defending here. He's dangerously wrong about this. And when you challenge him on that, he's going to immediately curl into a fetal position and declare soundly and shrilly to all of his little partners at the AMA and elsewhere that he's being attacked. And they're going to agree with him. Oh, this is terrible. They should respect our authority, right? It's just awful. I would think, you know what? I could get $2.5 million for my favorite charity if I go on somewhere and defend my views because I'm confident in my views because I know that I've done the work and I'm solid and I'm prepared. Dude, I am totally going to be doing that, right? That is totally something I'm going to be doing. All right. So let's carry on very quickly. By the way, forget Peter Hotez, forget the AMA. The AMA is broken. If you want honest medicine, go to places like the FLCCC, right? Pierre Corey, Paul Merrick. They now have the Senior Fellows program. Oh, I'm a senior fellow there now too, as well as being on the board. They are doing everything they can to get honest medicine, honest information out there so that you can have proper informed consent. And by the way, there's a lot of bad information out there, and it's not coming from these people. It is coming from the center of the system. It's coming from these guys. It's coming from the CDC, the NIH, the FDA. They are broken institutions. Look, Everybody knows that, right? So we're not going to spend any more time trying to figure out how to make them better, right? Can't do that. They're non-reformable. Just wish them well or whatever, but don't fall for their stuff anymore because they are dangerously misguided. These people are not. Honest Medicine, go there. Now, for my Peak Prosperity subscribers, we've got a lot to talk about back at the mothership. I do this every week. This is a scouting report. If you'd like to join, please do. We got to talk about this. There's another $176 million to go towards these things that don't work. We got to talk about this a little bit more. Now they tell us, oh no, how did they? Common knowledge game, of course. We got to talk about this, though. Andrew Bridgen here talking about that there's a strong chance of, well, I'll let you read that piece down there, but Intel is starting to worry about this idea that there's a dirty bomb on the way. And of course, that connects to this thing, which is that U.S. bases have been put on heightened alert because of something. Put it all together, we got a lot to talk about. All right, with that, thank you very much for listening. Have a great July 4th, everybody else. Remember, don't fall for these charlatans, right? And please have a happy, safe weekend here in the United States. Everybody else, have a happy weekend. All right, bye for now.